Hello, and welcome to the BYU Family History Library webinar series. We're glad you could join us today. I'm Anna Allred, and I'll be your host for this webinar. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box and I can address your concerns. You're welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments, insights, and questions. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar will be on January 13th, Connect and Collaborate in the FamilySearch Community with Catherine Grant. If you would like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we are pleased to hear from James Tanner, who will be giving a presentation on how does the FamilySearch Catalog work. James has over 39 years experience in genealogical research and is an avid blogger of Genealogy Star blog and Rejoice and Be Exceeding Glad. He has served as a family history volunteer for 17 years and has presented at expos and conferences around the US, Canada, and Europe. He is a member of the board of directors of the Family History Guide Association and is currently serving at the BYU Family History Library. James is a professional photographer and has 7 children, 34 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. And James, if you're ready, we'll turn the time over to you.
Thanks. Here we go. And start. Can you see my screen okay?
Yep, looks great.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone to another webinar from the BYU Brigham Young University Family History Library. We've been back in the library now for quite some time, and we had some remodeling go on during the pandemic, which is now all finished. And so we're basically back to what looks like normal, except for the pandemic. We are also having classes every Sunday afternoon. They're virtual classes. They begin at 3 o'clock. And then you can get online and find out the schedule of the classes that are upcoming, all on the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel, BYU webpage, the BYU Family History Library webpage. And you can also see these videos as they're recorded on the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel. Okay, get all that kind of straightened out. We're going to talk today about the FamilySearch Catalog and how does the catalog work. And I think that there's a lot of, unless you have a certain type of background in doing research in libraries that extends back in time, learning about the catalog is something that you don't just pick up. It's something that you actually have to learn how they work and why they work the way they do. And the first question, of course, is what is a catalog? And there's a difference between catalogs and some of the other categories of organization that I'll talk about. A catalog is a list of items, typically in one alphabetical order or another systematic order. In other words, it can be just about anything, but it is it's generally applied to large collections of items or large collections of paintings, antiques, books in the library. And where we would normally run into it in the old days was this thing looking at what we've got here is a card catalog. And the card catalog was the most common way of organizing information in large quantities going back many years, back into historic times. The information in the catalogs was generally stored on a 3x5 card. And so you would see those pull drawers that were in the first image you pulled out. And I'm surprised now, because to me, a card catalog was just kind of synonymous with going to libraries, but libraries don't have card catalogs anymore, don't have the physical card catalog. And I am sure that any younger people in the United States, at least, have probably not ever seen one or worked with one or even knew what they were if you were looking at it. However, these cards, by the millions of thousands or whatever, were the way of keeping track of all the information. So important to understand about a catalog, and the catalog is that for multiple topics about the same book or document, there were multiple subject cards in the entire catalog. And so you had all of these, it was kind of redundancy, but if you looked up a subject, you may find the same book under different subjects as you went through the catalog. So the number of cards did not correspond to the number of items in the collection. So the number of books in the library or documents, periodicals, and all the other items that were kept track of with the catalog. The number on the card would lead you to the physical book or document in the library or archive. There are many different classification systems out there. One that you might have heard of is the Dewey Decimal System. There's modified Dewey Decimal Systems. There's the Library of Congress classification system. There's a list of different classification systems that have been used going back hundreds, well, at least a couple of hundred years. And these systems have been expanded into what we have now on computers, and that's has been an interesting phenomenon. But this number theoretically could tell you exactly where to go in the library. If you knew the library's structure and you knew how the shelves were organized, you could simply walk into the shelves and walk over to the right place and pull this book off the shelf. But there was a problem, and that is if the items were lost, they were lost if they were physically moved without changing the location number on the card catalog. So in other words, this number had to constantly refer to a physical location. Now, one of the interesting things, my background partially came from working in the library as at the University of Utah as a bibliographer. And as a bibliographer, my main activity was working with these cards. And the idea here was to verify book orders. And the professors at the university would order books, and we had to search the library to make sure that the library didn't already have a copy of the book, because they didn't want to spend the money to order books and have multiple copies. And so basically what happened is that we did a lot of walking around the library looking for books, because if they weren't on the shelf where they were supposed to be, we had to track down the actual book. If it said in the card catalog that we had a copy of it, then that meant that somewhere in the university that book was located. Usually we found them in professors' offices or in the basement in the cataloging department, or they'd simply been misshelved. And for that reason, we also learned how to, what we call, read the shelves. That means go through all the numbers on the shelf, make sure they were in right order, and that the books weren't misshelved. Okay, now we come along with the technology. The technology, what it did was to allow this information to be all this information in all these books and the information on those card catalogs to be digitized, to be put into files that could be accessed by a computer. And so the process that's been going on for some time with the digital process is, including going back to 1938 when they began to do microfilm. All of the microfilm now at the Family History Library, at least almost all the microfilm at the Family History Library, has been digitized. And I say that is that there are still more microfilm records that are being brought to the library constantly. So it's an ongoing process. But as time goes on, more and more of the records of the world will become digitized. And now there's millions and millions of books that have been digitized, and billions of records that have been digitized. Not all in FamilySearch, but spread across the world. There are billions and billions of records. Now, let's go back to what there is as an index. Now we'll come back to the digital images here in just a second when I talk about basically how the library itself the catalog in the FamilySearch Catalog works. So what's the difference between an index and a catalog? A catalog deals with categories, the catalog categories. And it is general. It does not define every single book and every single document. So a catalog will give you a group of documents, but it won't necessarily find a single document. And then in addition to that, an index looks at the inside or the content of the documents and books, and it tells you where the information is within the document itself. So an index can be complete, it can be very simple, it can be hit and miss. In other words, how well the index works and how extensive it is depends on the time and the effort that was put into indexing. So you can see some of the entries here have multiple pages. Some of them are only on one page. These particular entries, although they are in Latin, are in alphabetical order by their Latin items. And someone had to physically go through the book and select each item for the catalog and then create a physical catalog, usually on slips of paper. They used to do it on cards or paper, and they would put these catalog entries in order in trays, and that's what evolved into having catalogs for libraries. So this was one way that the information was retrieved. Now, if you're thinking about this, if you had a book like this book, assuming that you read Latin, of course, then you would have to, if you didn't have an index, you would be forced to go through the book word for word to look for any specific information that you might be interested in. So in order to know whether any one of these items listed in the index was in the book, there's only one way to do that, because you can see if you look closely at the pages listed here that they aren't any at all consecutive. They're jumping around. And so this is accessing an index, and in our current terminology, accesses information randomly. It's random access because it can jump from one page to the next page, and it also gives you all the pages that particular piece of information is located on. So when you're looking at a catalog, you're not looking at an index. And when you're looking at an index, you're not looking at a catalog. So here's the definition. An index is an alphabetical list of named subjects with references to the places where they occur, typically found at the end of a book. So that's where you would find an index. Now, why is that important? Well, indexing is important on FamilySearch because what we're doing when we're indexing the records is the same thing that was being done to that book. That is, we're going through the records word for word, and we're choosing the fields and the location where we want this information to be stored. And then that information is being stored in a computer program, which is directly analogous to a book index. So when you're searching for a name on FamilySearch, you are looking through an index of the records that have been made by physically looking at each record and extracting the information from the records. Now, the great promise of the future, and which is, by the way, already here, is that the computers will be able to read the records and do the indexing without having people to go through the terribly long and process of doing it. And that has been happening. Lately, FamilySearch has been using what's called optical character recognition. I'll mention that in a moment, to index records. And more of the records on FamilySearch over the near time, not looking off into years in the future, but starting right now, are being indexed by the millions. The time it takes to do the index for a huge amount of records is phenomenally less than it would take for individuals to go through and do the same kind of indexing. And the question is it going to be accurate? Well, yes, at this point, it is being accurate. The second question is, are they going to be able to index handwritten documents? And the answer to that is yes, that is now available. And so it is happening in some of the records that are being digitized now and being subjected to computer indexing or optical character recognition or handwriting recognition, and are being entered into the FamilySearch catalog as index documents. Okay, so now we have that process. We can do that. What another thing that we can do also with computers is, because if a document becomes digitized, then we can use optical character recognition from a scanned file or a photograph image of a document that's been digitally photographed, and then it will appear, then it can be read by the computer program and turned into what we call a text document. Once it's a text document, it can be searched character by character or word by word, and you have global searches. We're all very used to this, even though we perhaps aren't aware of what it's doing. And that's what Google does with websites, because all of the information on websites, minus the images, are of photographic images or visual images, are files, and the files can be searched. And so when you put in a name into Google, it can go through the billions of websites and then find that particular name and every other name like it, and give you 200 million results in a matter of a few seconds. So this is basically the process that's pulling us. It's not pushing, it's pulling us into the future, because as this technology gets more and more accurate in the way that it works, and now it's phenomenally accurate, by the way, but even then, it's still only very recently was accurate with handwritten records. But now that it's becoming more and more accurate, it's presently starting to compete favorably. We'll say it's a nice thing that they're winning, favorably competing with human text indexing. So not that human indexing will ever go out of business. Believe me, it's not going to happen, because sometimes it really is going to take somebody to look at a record before you can figure out what it says and why it says what it says. But for the vast majority of records out there, OCR and handwriting recognition will begin to make a tremendous difference in the number of searchable records. Now, to give you an idea of what's happening out there, there are all these are finding aids. Even though we have what are called string searches or character searches, or word searches that can be done by the computer, there's still a need for indexes, and there's still a need for catalogs, because each one of these types of records serves a different purpose in doing research. It doesn't help me to get us to do a research on Google, for example. If I'm looking for books about, I can put in a topic like books about Arizona. I'm not interested in that. I might be able to say, I might get a return back of millions of books about that have the word Arizona in them. But if I'm standing in front of a library and I want to know what they have in their library that I can look at, doing a search on Google for a general topic like Arizona history is not going to help. But if I know that the library has a catalog and I go to the library catalog and I look up Arizona history, they're going to give me specific books that they have physically in their collection. And that will be helpful, because knowing what they have in their collection, and as opposed to all the other collections out there, is what's helpful for doing research. And most of the time now we do that step before, obviously, before all of this computer things happened over the last 30 or 40 years. I would always go into the library, and if I was interested in the subject, I would immediately start by looking in the catalog, because I was not going to just wander the shelves, which I did often too, but I don't wander the shelves if I had a specific goal in mind. But on the other instance, as we get more and more digitized, the library catalogs are now becoming digitized. And so that means that instead of actually physically going to the library, I can now look on my computer, for example, to see what's in the Brigham Young University library. And then I can go directly to the library and find the item that I'm looking for. So there's, it's sort of a process, but as time goes on, there'll be fewer trips to the library, and there'll be almost no trips to look for catalogs. Because all of these things are now online, and they go. Unfortunately, this particular topic opens up a tremendously wide area of how to do research and how research is conducted on the internet and how research is done generally across the internet for things like books and historical records. Okay, so it's still, regardless of all the information that's been developed and all what's online with computers, some older documents have been transcribed into text documents. So people have sat down and typed those documents into a computer. And so there are transcriptions of documents and transcriptions and translations of documents. But unfortunately, transcriptions are not consistently done. So you may find a transcription of an old document, or you may not find a transcription. I'm often asked, for example, when people are looking at foreign languages other than English documents, and they say, well, has somebody translated this for us? No, the answer is no, you've got to do that translation process yourself, despite the fact that the document has been cataloged and indexed and is in a digital file. There's still another step out there, and that's getting the information out of the document. And now, as I mentioned, that optical character recognition and handwriting recognition will begin that process to transfer all that documents. But there's still millions and millions of documents to go. And so it'll probably take some time before that becomes even noticeable in doing research. Okay, many documents are not yet processed by optical character recognition. Have not yet been processed by optical character recognition, by indexing, or by transcription. So they're just not available. They're just locked up in a document. And the only way you're going to know that this particular document exists is if somebody has cataloged it and put it in a catalog and listed it as part of some collection of documents. And that's what genealogists basically do, is look for where documents are kept and find documents. We think a lot of people have the idea that genealogy is the idea of we're going to find people. Well, we do find people, but it's kind of incidental to the task we have of finding the documents first, and then reading the documents and interpreting the documents and taking the information from the documents and putting that into a form that will enable us to establish relationships between family members through generations. So this is the whole process of what we do, and the catalogs are basically what help us do that, as well as everything else. So without these finding aids, we would be forced to examine documents page by page. And that still is the case, because many documents are not indexed, and many documents have not yet been are not available either through character recognition or otherwise. And so we're still in the process of having to look at documents page by page and read word by word for the information that we're looking for. Okay, so it comes up occasionally as to how many documents on FamilySearch are into these different categories. Well, only about 20% of the documents that are on FamilySearch, the digital documents that are on FamilySearch presently, have been indexed. And so if you do a name search on FamilySearch, you're not going to find if you don't find what you're looking for, that does not mean that it's not there. It just means that all you've done is searched about 20% of the documents. And then if you go to the catalog, you're probably searching an additional, the index documents are also in the catalog. So the catalog adds a number of other places where you can look, but in each case, if they're unindexed, you're going to be back to the page by page examination of the documents. And then there's a huge number of documents that are stored in what's called the images collection. And the image collection on FamilySearch, if you go to the search tab above on every page of FamilySearch, there's a search tab. Click on that. And the first one is records. The second one is images. Entry is images. And the images collections are probably more than half of everything that's available on FamilySearch, but they are neither cataloged nor are they specifically, nor are there no indexing. And so these are the records that are the most in need of help, and the ones that will be the targets, I'm sure, by FamilySearch for the optical character recognition and handwriting recognition that will render them searchable. And so that's important to know that. Now, the images are all on FamilySearch. There's billions of them. And you can, you click on the images, you can search by country and then by more specific geographic locations, and then see all the documents that are being added daily to the FamilySearch collection, but have not yet been processed. They are only there by geographic designation and the type of document that is available. So there's going to be many, many pages to look through for individual pieces of information. Now, it may seem a little bit not serious to say that the FamilySearch catalog is a catalog, but it's important to remember that it is a catalog. It is not an index. It is not a word by word search of the documents. It is mainly a catalog. And the books on the FamilySearch catalog are digitized copies of physical books and documents in the FamilySearch library. And there are others that exist only as digital files. And then all the digitized books have been processed with OCR and can be searched character by character. So there are over 500,000 books on the Family Search website that have been completely processed by optical character recognition and are searchable word for word. So you go to the book section under the search menu up there, and you will find all of these 500,000 books. In addition, all of the microfilm, as I mentioned earlier, have been digitized. 2.4 million rolls of microfilm have all now been digitized, and that's being processed. So as time goes on, more and more of those images will be cataloged and put into and made available in digital format on the FamilySearch catalog through the FamilySearch catalog. So eventually, if we were to go forward a few years, it would be possible that all of the documents available from FamilySearch have been digitized and are in the catalog. Now, at the time frame for having those all processed through optical character recognition and being searched word for word is still a ways out there. So that's kind of the process of where we are. It's important to understand that all genealogical records, and many others also, are first cataloged by geographical area. Okay, so when we talk about doing genealogical research, we need to be aware of the fact that it's necessary to start with the places that the events occurred in your ancestors or relatives' lives. It's nice to know they were born on a certain date. It's really nice to know they had a name and that we know the name. But if we don't know the location of that event, we're basically unable to proceed with any kind of research. If you give a vague place for the event, like the United States, or they were born in Germany, or they were born in Scandinavia or in Norway or someplace, that doesn't help, because finding the records is based on the geographic location. And so assuming that you were starting to look for a person, you would first want to know where the events happened. That's the first question to ask. So we assume that because the person was alive, that they were born. If they had a spouse and children, we're going to assume that they were married. And if they are no longer living and it's more than 110 years since they were born, we're going to assume they're dead. But that doesn't help us until we have a location to start looking for records. And so the catalog primarily by default comes up with searching by place. And that's the reason for it, because that's really where the rubber hits the road, where we begin to actually make get some traction in finding the records that we're looking for. So we have an opportunity to search, and we can search by different categories here. So first of all, as I mentioned, we can search by place. Now, what do we mean by place? Place is synonymous with the concept of jurisdictions as far as genealogy is concerned. When we're talking about a place, we're talking about a location on the face of the earth, but we're also talking about all of the geopolitical, social constructs that apply to that place. So the fact that I have located the exact location of a person's birth doesn't help me until I know all of the different jurisdictions. Those are the political and social subdivisions that pile up on top of that. So let me give you an example. Let's say we go into a cemetery and we find a name on a grave marker, and we know where the cemetery is. So we know where the person was buried, and we've identified that person as being buried there. But that we need to know that that cemetery, for example, if it were here in Utah, was in Provo City Cemetery, and we would have a way to look for records in Provo. And we would also know that that person was buried in the jurisdiction of the Utah County. And so we would know there were Utah County records that may apply to that person. And we would know that Utah County was in the jurisdiction of Utah. And so we would be able to look for records in Utah at the Utah level. And then in the United States, we would find additional records. So what kinds of records are we talking about? Start at the top. US records would be like a military tax records, anything that had to do Social Security, anything that had to do with government records and regulations, state records, marriage records, birth and death records, marriage records, and are basically usually on a county level. Birth and death are usually the United States kept on the state level, but sometimes you find them in the city level. So you need to know what those jurisdictions are and how they work. And as you work your way down, you'll find cemetery records, and the cemetery records are probably kept either right on the cemetery itself, or they're kept in the city where the cemetery is located, if there are such records. So it's only through the place that you begin this process of understanding. And that's why the catalogs are organized by place. So if you put in a place, you'll get there. And the next one is surnames. It's interesting, I guess, from a kind of an abstract standpoint to look for a surname, but a surname search is not going to tell you a lot of information, and it's certainly not going to point you to any records that are going to be useful, because most surnames, like my own, Tanner, is an occupational surname, and other surnames are locational surnames, and they have nothing to do with relationship between different individuals. So because your surname is Tanner and my surname is Tanner does not mean we're related. And the catalog likewise does not help you find those relationships by searching with a surname. Titles are basically the titles of the documents. If you already know the title of the document, or that's what you know, then yes, you can search by a title. This is probably most useful for books because you may know the name of the book, but you may not know anything else about the book, and then searching by a title will help you get to that particular document or book. Now you're beginning, if you understood what I said was talking about previously, then you'll begin to see that the catalog, what we're talking about with the catalog on a family search catalog, is a real catalog. In other words, it's organized by subject matter. Places are a subject matter, and it's also organized by surnames, which is a subject matter, and titles, which is a part of a category of books, which are part of which can then be defined down by their titles and their author. So the next one, of course, is author. And this is helpful if you just happen to know that one of your ancestors wrote a book, or that so-and-so wrote a book about his ancestors, then you can search for an author. Subjects are helpful for an illustrative purpose. If you really want to know what's going on within the catalog and within the Family Search Catalog, start searching for subjects, because then you'll see that sometimes you need to be very careful in how you define your subject in order for you to find an item in the catalog. And so sometimes if you just said, I need church records, you may find out that there are a lot of church records, and maybe none of them are the ones you see that you need. And so the subjects are helpful merely as a way of beginning to understand how the catalog is organized. The next one is keywords, which are words that are attached, and the technical term for it is metadata. They're words that are selected from the item that are used in a catalog search. And they are words that if you put in Russia church records, those would be keywords, and you would find Russian church records. That might not help you find the records you want, because they're going to be further organized by place, and there are a lot of places within Russia. And so this is, that's kind of the way it goes. So in addition, there's a call number. The call number is what I showed at the very beginning, and that is, it is the information that tells you where in the library that particular item is located physically. Over the past few years, a lot of the books in the Family History Library in Salt Lake City were removed and put into storage. And that was primarily due to the digitizing. But now most of those books are coming back. And so the call numbers become important. If you do go to the library and are looking for an item, it is very, very helpful to have the call number, because that'll take you right to the shelf and where it is located. The film feature, image group number, these are the numbers that are holdovers from all of the microfilm that was digitized, and they are extremely helpful, because sometimes that's the only way you can recognize a microfilm roll is through its film number. And there may be 20 or 30 or 100, many hundreds of films with the same place, and all of them just simply differing by the film number. So the film number becomes very important, and it becomes important to record when you're doing anything. Availability is important, because there are a lot of items which are only available in the Family History Center in Salt Lake City. And you might want to know whether the things you're looking for are available online or at the Family History Center. So to repeat, to begin any genealogical research, we must identify, push the button, the exact place where an event in our ancestor's life occurred. So now we have it. Let's say we now know that our person lived or died or was married or had worked or did something in Cardston, Alberta, Canada. Okay, so then we can look up and see what all the jurisdictions are. That's almost inevitably the first thing I do whenever I look at a location. I always say, well, where is this location? So now in Wikipedia has become a great tool in this help, because Wikipedia has listed almost every known inhabited location on the face of the earth, and gives, in most cases, can give you the exact jurisdictional area. So you see that Cardston is a village or town, and it's listed in Cardston County, and its planning region is South Saskatchewan, and then it's in the southern Alberta, and then its province is Alberta, and its country is Canada. And this can be very helpful, because now we now have a list of records of jurisdictions that may have records about the individual who we have located in Cardston. So all of these become search terms for the FamilySearch Catalog. Okay, there's the key. The key is that now I can look for Canada, I can look for Alberta, and I can look for or I may look for southern Alberta or South Saskatchewan, but I'll probably jump down to Cardston County and then the village and town. So how does that work? Now, it's important also to understand that the jurisdictional catalog terms in the FamilySearch Catalog go back historically. So some of the places listed in the catalog do not exist anymore. They simply do not. They're no longer countries, or no longer places where you find records. So we're looking at a long list here. If I were to do a catalog search, which I did here, if you can see the place being Germany, they're going to give me this list of places to start with. And I really, before I can go any further, I really have to know which of these places that are listed I am going to need to know. But I need to key you into the fact that some of these places no longer exist. So they're not actual places, they're historic places. So it gets a little bit difficult, and that's where it comes into the role of learning about the catalog becomes important, because then you begin to know, okay, so now we're going to do a search here, and we're going to search with the highest level of jurisdiction, and that's Canada, and find out what we need to know from that. So when we do that, then we get an option here. And what we need to do is click on the blue item. The black items are the general categories. The blue items are the links to the catalog, further catalog items. Why they did this, I have no idea, but that's the way it is, and that's what we do. So we click on the blue item. Now we'll get a list, and we can click on a link that says places within Canada. And then when we do that, we have all of the provinces in Canada and the territories. And so we can then choose which one we want. In this case, we're going to go choose Alberta, because we've known that that's right. Now, when you get to Alberta, you'll begin to see that there is a real challenge, because these are all of the places in the catalog that pertain to Alberta. And so when somebody tells me, well, my ancestor was born in Alberta, Canada, I can go, well, which of these places was that person born? They say, we have no idea. And I'll say, well, you want to start looking through all of them? Be my guest. But I doubt if that's going to happen. And so what I would suggest is that we do more research until we can identify a location. In this case, we have to understand that there are records in every one of these cataloged places. They're all going to be different. They're all going to be specific to these very much smaller areas than Alberta as a province. So now, taking part of the list, we find Calgary listed. And so we can choose Calgary. And now we're seeing parts of Alberta, Canada, Alberta as Calgary. And these are the specific records that exist for Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Do this with any other location in any country in the world. So you start out with the name of the country. You can then put in any subdivisions. It'll say places within. If there are no places within, then that's it. You've reached that level of what the catalog has, or where the records have been cataloged to that level. So there are no more lower level catalogs. And in case of Alberta, of Calgary, there are more subdivisions within the city of Calgary. And so you would look for, you can still go further down with jurisdictional records, but the catalog has stopped here. This is where it ends. So when we find that list, we search all the records that include the date and place of the events in our ancestors' lives. It's interesting to me that a lot of people will see a list of records like this in the catalog and not realize that they need to look in every single one of those categories, and that there may be records about their ancestor, assuming that the records cover the time period that the ancestor lived. So this is a guide to anyone doing research to tell you what you have to do and what you have to search. And so there's the that's the advantage, of course, of the index, or having everything digitized and in character recognition, because you wouldn't have to go through this process. You would just search through all these documents digitally with a search engine. So here's a record from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And perhaps you didn't know that, yes, FamilySearch has newspapers, and they have digital copies of the newspapers. So it's important to go through the catalog in detail and look in each of the categories. Here's another record from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. This one happens to be parish registers from 1865 to 1916 of the Catholic Church of St. Mary's Cathedral in Calgary, Alberta. And some of you may not have assumed or may not even have known that there were Catholic churches in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. But by going through the catalog and seeing what kinds of records are available under all the different categories, then you would be made aware of that. And if your ancestors were French or had come from French background, and they were probably, and they lived in Calgary, and they'd gone west to Alberta and lived, you'll note if you look at these records, if you can read that, the record is in French. So that's kind of the interesting kinds of things that you turn out, that begin to become available to you as you look at the catalog. Now, here's kind of a general rule, and I've made this one of my general rules of genealogy, and that is you can guess, but don't make assumptions. When you're doing research, you can make guesses. You can say, well, I guess he might have been born in France, but don't ever assume that he was born in France. The assumption means that you've already decided that he was born in France, and you're going to go look for records in France. But when you're in the guessing stage, if you stay always in the guessing stage until you find the actual information that gives you the location of an event in his life, that isn't going to help you to assume to go start looking in France for records. So that's what happens to a lot of people. They'll say, well, my ancestor was born in Germany, let's look at German records. Well, there's millions of German records, and it would take a lifetime to even begin to look through and find all the records, much less. So you need to use these organizational things, the catalogs and the indexes and the search engines to get into these records, or otherwise the time frames for doing the work would be increased exponentially, greatly. So remember rule 4 of the rules for genealogy, and that's there's always more records. And no matter what you think, no matter how many times you think that you've searched and you have found every record that you can think of, and I could go down the list and start asking you, you could keep saying, I've searched there, I've searched there, I've searched there. My answer is that eventually, as we go through the list and as we start looking, you'll find out that there are more records, and it's just inevitable. So never get to the position where you think you've searched everywhere, because you haven't. It isn't possible. The structure isn't there yet to allow anyone to search everywhere. And I hope you understand that learning to use the resources of libraries, archives, and online repositories takes practice. You have to, it only helps you to go into the catalog and work on it and try and find a document. For example, start with knowing that there's a document there and then try and find it. You know for a fact that this roll of microfilm or this record should be in the Family Search library, and then see if you can find it in the catalog. And that will help you learn the skills that you need to do that. And above all, you always need to keep learning. We need to always have more learning. I've been spending the last few days learning how to do some additional programs and looking at new programs. It's a process that never stops, especially with genealogy. I'm always learning about new records. I'm always learning about new places to look and new collections online that are appearing constantly. And so this is an important aspect of the whole process of genealogy. Well, thanks for watching. And let's see if we have any questions. Anybody want to ask anything? You can put it in the chat, or you can put it on the, I'll go back to the stop sharing button. You can raise your hand or you can get a Q&A. Okay, well. We'll see you then. I guess we're through. Take care. Hope everybody is careful about the pandemic. We'll see you.
Thank you, James Tanner, for that wonderful presentation. And thank you all for attending today. I learned a lot. Hope you guys did too. Let's see. And we hope you'll join us for our next presentation, which will be on January 13th. Connect and collaborate in the family search community with Catherine Grant. Again, Thursday at 5 p.m. Mountain Time. And then a recording of this webinar will be made available next week, and you can view that on our YouTube channel or on our website. If you have any comments or questions, you can always email us at fhl_webinars@byu.edu or follow Facebook and Twitter. Thank you and have a wonderful week.